April 16th, 1945. They've driven across Russia, across Ukraine, across Poland. The Red Army, a massive, inexorable force, slowly pushing back the Axis powers to within their own borders, and even swallowing some of those powers. But now they've reached Germany, and are ready for one more crusade. And today begins the final Soviet drive on Berlin. I'm Indy Neidell. This is an extra episode of World War II because there would be too much to cover this weekend otherwise. American President Franklin Roosevelt died the other day on the 12th, and it may come as a surprise that there were great outpourings of sorrow for him in the Soviet Union. The newspapers that carried the announcement were black-bordered, and it was even a visibly emotional Vyacheslav Molotov, Soviet foreign minister, who broke into a formal state dinner to deliver the news, calling FDR a true friend of Russia. When U.S. Ambassador to the Soviet Union Averell Harriman now suggests, as he has before, that Molotov be sent to the upcoming San Francisco conference, Joseph Stalin agrees to this. I've talked about this before. That conference is to hammer out a constitution for the United Nations, and Stalin had refused Molotov's presence there amid concerns of an anti-Soviet conspiracy among the Western allies. So this is a big deal. But make no mistake, Stalin is still pretty convinced of this conspiracy, though he wants to tread lightly with a new man, Harry Truman, in the White House until he knows just what policies that man will pursue. He is also very concerned by Soviet intelligence reports of German troops being sent from the Western Front to the east and reports of surrenders by telephone from German units to the American army. He thinks the larger Anglo-American plan may well be taking Berlin by surprise attack, despite them saying that is not their plan. It was, therefore, with the utmost wariness that Stalin parried Harriman's carefully modulated query about the imminence of a Red Army attack directed against Berlin. His response was studiously offhand, even dismissive. A Soviet offensive was indeed in the offing. It might or might not be successful, but the main axis was directed towards Dresden rather than Berlin, a fact already well known to General Eisenhower. Yet almost at that same hour, the thousands of Soviet guns massed along the Oder-Neisse front were being readied and loaded, all positioned to fire off a stupendous opening barrage heralding the Red Army's assault on Berlin. But though Stalin won't tell the U.S. ambassador, a Soviet POW captured Nekustrin tells his captors, the Germans, that the attack is to begin the very next day, today the 16th. Both Adolf Hitler and Army Group Vistula Commander Gotthard Heinrizi find this report credible, and over the night of the 15th, pull back Theodor Busse's 9th Army to its 2nd defense line. The three Soviet fronts to be involved in this enormous offensive, 1st and 2nd Belarusian and 1st Ukrainian, have been feverishly preparing for it. Just the 1st Belarusian front has sent out over 2,500 recon sorties, and the German defenses have been photographed as far away as 100 kilometers. The massive amount of artillery is all over 76 millimeters and varies between 233 and 295 guns per kilometer, so roughly one for every 4 meters. 7,500 combat aircraft in 4 air armies will ensure aerial superiority and work with the ground troops in armor in smashing the defense lines and going mobile. Front Commander Georgy Zhukov has 77 rifle divisions and 7 tank and mechanized corps beyond the 8 artillery divisions and 3,155 tanks and self-propelled guns. Facing him are the 14 divisions and 512 tanks of Theodor Busse's 9th Army. Zhukov is aiming for surprise, so the opening barrage will be very powerful but quite brief. In some areas, the Soviet infantry is only going to be like 100 meters from the enemy, and the assault is to begin at night. So the Soviet gunners have been training night firing way back in the rear. It will not be completely dark though, since Zhukov has dozens and dozens of super strong searchlights around every 200 meters or so along the front, sending powerful beams as far as 5 kilometers. As for 1st Ukrainian Front, its commander Ivan Konev plans a longer bombardment, 145 minutes in 3 phases. He's going to lay down a smokescreen too. Unlike Zhukov's front, who have a bridgehead on the west of the Oder, Konev must force the Neisse River, and indeed everything depends on a successful crossing, hence the smoke. He has 120 engineer battalions and 13 bridging battalions to help with the job. He has another problem though, getting his armor across the river fast enough to prevent the enemy from falling back to the line of the River Spree, some 40 kilometers to the rear. Konstantin Rokossovsky's 2nd Belarusian Front to the north, with its 33 rifle divisions and 4 tank and mech corps and their 951 tanks, is not to join the offensive until the 20th. And their big challenge will be forcing the Oder River, where it's forked into 2 parts. Even worse, when Rokossovsky looked over the ground with his army commanders last week, the land between the 2 Oders is flooded and marshy and is 3 kilometers wide, so ferries and pontoons are no good. What to do? Well, he plans to attack on a wide front with 3 armies supported by 3 tank corps, and if they have success in any one sector, all resources will then be thrown at that sector. Once over the rivers and through the enemy defense lines, Rokossovsky plans to reach the River Elbe in 12 to 15 days. Intelligence says the German defenses are actually strongest where Rokossovsky plans to attack. The 11 divisions and 242 tanks of Hasso von Manteuffel's 3rd Panzer Army defend here, to a depth of over 10 kilometers, with strong points connected by continuous trench lines. They also have slit trenches, machine gun pits at the Oder itself, a 2nd defense line 20 kilometers back on the Randov, and even a 3rd one yet further back. The total German situation was too uncertain to permit any coherent planning in the event the defense on the rivers failed. The one overriding objective left was to prolong the war. Hitler had never been more firmly in command, and as long as he lived, there was no way out short of total defeat in the field or the miracle he predicted. Anticipating an Allied Soviet junction that would split Germany in 2, Hitler, on the 10th and 14th of April, issued orders naming Dönitz commander-in-chief in the north and Kesselring in the south. The appointments were to take effect after contact between the 2 areas was broken. Hitler expected to retain the supreme command in one or the other himself. On the 15th, he transfers command of the Berlin city defense to Army Group Vistula. Until then, it's been directly under his command. The Germans are a bit confused about just where the attacks are going to come. They know they're going to attack towards Berlin, of course, but they think Konev's front is going to likely campaign towards Prague. And Army Group Center Commander Ferdinand Schörner tells Hitler that he's concentrating southwest of Bunzlau, so when the attacks go off, Schörner has a whole lot of force, including 2 full panzer divisions, over 80 kilometers south of the actual main Soviet attacks. Zhukov is the one aiming straight at Berlin. Konev would, of course, like to grab some of the glory of capturing that city, so his 2 tank armies have orders to burst out from the infantry, advance by day and night as quickly as possible, bypassing enemy strong points until they reach Lubin, where the boundary between his front and Zhukov's ends. After that, his guys can go where he likes. On the 14th, Zhukov launches reconnaissance in force attacks into the German positions on the Zilov Heights. Yep, tanks and reinforced rifle battalions go as deep as 5 kilometers into them. German command is not, however, fooled by these and deduces they are just for recon. And on top of that, the Soviets do not discover the second line of German defenses, to where much of the Germans withdraw the night of the 15th. That is their main defense line on the Zilov Heights. At the stroke of 5 a.m., April 16th, 1945, Zhukov's offensive begins. Not only the ground itself heaved and whirled in repeated spouts, but the very air set up its own screeching and whirring, sending its own storm of blast-whipped wind in a fresh vortex of destruction. As the guns fired for 20 minutes, earth and what passed for sky slowly merged, a vast curtain raised by 500,000 shells, rockets and mortar bombs falling to a depth of 5 miles on the forward German positions. 3 minutes before the end of this opening bombardment, one searchlight shone its beam vertically into the sky, at which 143 searchlights in the sectors of the assault armies switched on to light up the ground in front of the advancing infantry. The men head forward a kilometer or so, but the searchlights can't really pierce the gloom and all the dust and the smoke, and in fact, a lot of the light is reflected. Orders come to turn them off, which are countermanded, so they go off and then they go on again. and the attack grows disorganized, with many units waiting for daylight to deal with all the streams and canals in the Oder Valley. The Hauptkanal, flooded at the foot of the Zilov Heights, has bridges that are all under German fire. So once there, the infantry stops until engineers can build their own bridges. The roads are clogged with ever more traffic because you can't really go off-road, the ground is marshy, and there are minefields. The attack, begun in darkness, was intended to achieve surprise, and batteries of powerful searchlights had been positioned to illuminate the German line and blind the defenders, but the lights did not have the expected effect. In the mud, smoke, and darkness, the waves of infantry piled up on each other. By daylight, the confusion was complete. Well, with his offensive already stopped, Zhukov decides at noon to change the plan. Orders have been issued for a renewed infantry push at 2 p.m. after another artillery barrage, but Zhukov says nope, and decides he's going to send in the armor. Now this really is a big change from the battle plan, which specifically says the armor will only enter the fray once the heights have been taken and they've achieved breakthrough. But no, he issues orders at 4:30 for 1st and 2nd Guards tank armies to join 8th Guards and 5th Shock armies. They head out, with the result being 1st Guards Tank Army crashing into the infantry units of 8th Guards and jamming the few roads open for movement. The tank columns pushed their way forward, only to hamper the transit of the artillery, which Zhukov badly needed for his infantry assault on the heights. Shouting, sweating, and cursing, the tanks edged forward, but the supporting elements for Rifle Corps and Division were hopelessly bogged down, forced off the roads, and sent sprawling into the soft, sticky ground of the valley. So progress is slow the rest of the day, and the fight continues even by night. Zhukov does not call it off. They've advanced only between 3 and 7 kilometers, so he issues orders for tomorrow, the 17th, for a big barrage and then a renewed assault, with the armor again fighting with the infantry. When Zhukov speaks to him this evening, Joseph Stalin is unimpressed with the lack of a breakthrough here, and is particularly angry about Zhukov committing his armor against Stavka's express instructions. He asks what certainty there can be that the heights will fall tomorrow. Zhukov says it is certain that they will, and remember, the more men the Germans throw in here, the quicker Berlin itself will fall, because they'll have fewer men then for street-by-street fighting. Stalin says he's considering ordering Konev to swing his tank armies straight up towards Berlin from the south and getting Rokossovsky to outflank the city from the north, then abruptly ends the call. Zhukov is concerned, to say the least. As for Konev's front, well, it's a different story. His bombardment begins at 6:15, the 16th, today, along with the laying of the smokescreen. They do a really good job with that, and it follows the line of the river Neisse, drifting back into the German defenses and being thickened by burning forests from artillery and airstrikes. After 40 minutes, the assault battalions begin to cross the river. This is at no less than 150 crossing sites, where engineers ready bridges and ferries, the lead battalions crossing in boats, towing the assault bridges. Engineers hit the water to stiffen the bridges up. Some tanks and self-propelled guns are lashed to ferries and brought over. The light pontoon bridges take about an hour to get launched. By 8 a.m., they've secured several crossings. By 9 a.m., the first 30-ton load bridge opens, and at noon, the first 60-ton bridge that can support armor and heavy artillery opens. And at 1 p.m., exactly, the first detachment of tanks crosses. This afternoon, Konev manages to break 3 armies more than 15 kilometers into the German defenses along a 30-kilometer front. Hour by hour in the evening, they try to widen the breach, even as ever more armor crosses the river and pours into it. The Germans are already bringing in their operational reserves to try and stem the tide, and by day's end, Konev's spearheads are hitting the 2nd German line halfway to the Spree. He orders night attacks to keep up the pressure, keep up the pace. His orders for the 17th call for penetrating the new line, reaching the Spree, and advancing to positions from northwest of Cottbus down to beyond Berghammer. He also has Polish Second Army and Soviet 52nd Armies heading for Dresden, today the 16th. By day's end, they're up to 10 kilometers in the enemy lines. They are ordered to continue to advance tomorrow, aiming for Görlitz. He also tells 28th Army to follow 3rd Guards Tank Army and advance along the Berlin axis. From the 17th then, Zhukov and Konev will be unequivocally racing each other for Berlin. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we stand after day 1 of the big Soviet drive on Berlin. Make no mistake, there are millions of people standing between the Red Army and the conquest of the German capital. But that army has millions of people of its own trying to complete the job. One more job which they began today, to finally put an end to this war. Well, to the European part of it at least, for the word world in World War II is capitalized. In June 1941, out of breath, exciting. In June 1941, I did an extra episode when the Red Army invaded the USSR, which began the fight that I covered today that might soon be coming to an end. You can see that right here, and you can join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com so that we might make more such episodes, because that is what finances our productions. See you this weekend.